The diplomatic station orbiting Kepler 442b hummed with the usual cacophony of 100 alien species conducting trade, negotiation, and the delicate dance of interstellar politics. Ava Martinez stood at the observation deck, her dark eyes scanning the crowd below through the transparent aluminum viewport. As humanity's youngest xenobiologist assigned to the station, she'd seen her fair share of strange creatures. But the Vrexian delegation still made her nervous. The Vrexians were apex predators from a high-gravity world towering, scaled behemoths with razor-sharp claws and a reputation for settling disputes through combat trials. Their young, called cubs, were half the size of adults, but twice as aggressive. Their predatory instincts not yet tempered by societal conditioning. Parker Chun, Ava's colleague and the station's cultural liaison, approached with 2 steaming cups of synthetic coffee. His easy smile did little to hide the tension in his shoulders. "You see the Vrexian cub down there?" Parker asked, nodding toward the promenade below. Ava followed his gaze. The creature prowled near the market stalls, its crimson scales catching the artificial light. It was barely adolescent by Vrexian standards, but still stood 7 feet tall, all sinew and coiled power. "Hard to miss," Eva replied. "Ambassador Krulax brought his offspring. Protocol says it's a sign of trust." "Or a test," Parker muttered. The cub moved through the crowd with the confidence of a creature that had never known fear. Smaller species scattered from its path, the insectoid chitters, the gaseous lumens, even the normally bold Aquarians gave it wide berth. The Vrexians had been late additions to the Galactic Coalition, their warrior culture viewed with suspicion by the more civilized species. Humans, having joined only 30 cycles prior, were still proving themselves as well. Eva watched as a group of Aquarian merchants set up their display of bioluminescent crystals. The delicate gems floated in suspension fields, casting rainbow patterns across the deck. The Vrexian cub approached, curiosity evident in the tilt of its massive head. "Eva," Parker said softly, "we should get down there." She was already moving toward the lift. By the time they reached the promenade, a crowd had gathered. The cub stood before the Aquarian stall, one massive claw extended toward a particularly brilliant crystal. The lead merchant, a creature of flowing water, held together by an environmental suit, burbled in distress. "No touch. Very fragile. Please, young one, step back." The cub growled a sound like grinding stone. It wasn't aggressive, Eva realized with her trained eye. It was excited, the way any young creature might be when encountering something beautiful. But the Aquarian didn't understand that. To them, the growl meant danger. The merchant's appendage fumbled for the emergency beacon at their side. Eva pushed through the crowd. Parker closed behind. She knew calling station security would escalate the situation into a diplomatic incident. The Vrexians viewed any challenge to their young as an insult to the entire clan. "Wait," Eva called out, but her voice was lost in the growing commotion. The cub's claw moved closer to the crystal. The Aquarian jerked backward, knocking the suspension field generator. Crystals tumbled through the air. The cub lunged forward, not attacking, but trying to catch them, and its massive form crashed into the stall. The Aquarian shrieked, and suddenly Ambassador Krulax was there, all 12 feet of armored fury, roaring at his offspring in the guttural Vrexian tongue. The cub cowered, confused and frightened by its parents' anger. The ambassador's claws extended, traditional punishment about to be administered in front of everyone. Ava saw the cultural disaster unfolding. The Aquarians would see their fear confirmed. The other species would whisper about Vrexian savagery, and any hope of better relations would shatter like those crystals. Parker stepped forward, his hands raised in the universal gesture of peace. His voice was calm, but firm. "Ambassador, please stop. What happened next would be debated in reports and testimony for weeks afterward. The Vrexian cub heard those two words, "Please stop," spoken in standard galactic common by a human, one of the galaxy's youngest and most fragile species. And something in those words, or perhaps in the tone, resonated. Witnesses would later struggle to describe what they saw. The cub moved so fast that most only perceived a blur of motion. One moment it stood cowering beneath its parent's raised claw. The next, it had positioned itself between Parker and the ambassador, its own smaller frame protecting the human who had spoken on its behalf. The cub didn't attack. It didn't roar or threaten. It simply stood there, head lowered in submission to its parent, but body planted firmly as a shield. The promenade fell silent. Ambassador Kralax stared at his offspring, then at Parker, then back at the cub. Something shifted in the ancient predator's eyes' recognition. Perhaps, or respect. Eva moved carefully to the scattered crystals, her hands working quickly. "These can be repaired," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "The suspension field matrix is intact. Parker, help me recalibrate." As they worked, the cub remained frozen in place. Parker met the young Vrexian's eyes' vertical pupils in seas of amber and nodded once. A gesture of acknowledgement between two beings who understood what it meant to be judged by appearance rather than intent. "Ambassador," Kralax slowly lowered his claws. He spoke, and the translation matrix rendered his words. "My offspring shows honor. You showed wisdom, human. Both rare qualities in the young." The crystals restored. The Aquarian merchants burbled their gratitude. The crowd dispersed, already spreading tales of what they'd witnessed. And Eva and Parker stood beside a Vrexian cub who had moved faster than physics should allow, not to attack, but to protect. Later, in their quarters, Parker would confess he'd been terrified. Eva would admit she'd been certain they were about to spark an interstellar incident. But in that moment on the promenade, they'd learned what the galaxy was slowly discovering about humanity. Sometimes the greatest strength wasn't in fangs or claws or technological superiority. Sometimes it was simply in knowing when to say, "Please stop," and meaning it. The cub, they heard later, had requested to study with human diplomats. The galaxy, it seemed, was still full of surprises.